The crosshairs trembled against the horizon as Hannah Morgan studied her breathing, watching the impossible target through her rifle scope. 3 miles away, a distance that defied every training manual. Every record in military history, a terrorist leader emerged from a concrete bunker, unaware that an 18-year-old girl from rural Montana was about to rewrite the rules of warfare forever. "Target acquired," Hannah whispered into her radio, her voice barely audible over the howling Afghan wind. The spotter beside her, Sergeant Marcus Reed, lowered his binoculars with shaking hands. "Hannah," Reed muttered, his weathered face creased with disbelief. "That's not a shot. That's a prayer. Winds gusting at 40 plus. Temperature differential throwing off every calculation. And you're talking about a 3-mile kill shot with a .338 Lapua Magnum when the world record is barely past a mile and a half." Hannah's finger found the trigger, her pulse steady despite the magnitude of what she was attempting. Below them, scattered across the valley floor, terrorist cells had converged for what intelligence indicated was a major weapons exchange. The target, Ivan Petrov, architect of bombing attacks across 3 countries, stood in the center of it all, believing himself untouchable at this distance. "Command, this is Overwatch 7. Hannah spoke into her headset, never taking her eye from the scope. "Requesting permission to engage primary target at extreme range." Static crackled through her earpiece before Colonel Catherine Rivera's voice cut through. "Morgan, confirm your range estimation." 4,800 meters, ma'am. Wind south-southeast at 42 knots, gusting to 55. Temperature differential calculated at 34 degrees. Coriolis effect compensation already dialed in." A long pause. "Morgan says, wow, that exceeds maximum effective range by over 2 miles. No military sniper in history has made a confirmed kill beyond 2,700 meters." Hannah's jaw tightened. She'd spent months analyzing every long-range engagement record, studying trajectory calculations, until her eyes burned practicing on targets most seasoned snipers wouldn't attempt. Her instructors called her obsessed. Her fellow recruits called her crazy. But lying here on this rocky outcrop, watching history unfold through her rifle scope, Hannah knew this moment had been inevitable since the day her grandfather first placed a rifle in her hands. "Ma'am, with respect," she replied. "No 18-year-old girl from Montana has ever been deployed to Afghanistan either, but here we are." In her mind, she could hear her grandfather's voice, the same words he'd written in the journal she discovered hidden in his old trunk. "When the moment comes when everything converges, you'll know. Trust that feeling, child. True aim comes from the heart." Hannah exhaled slowly, feeling the moment of convergence approaching a perfect alignment that transcended conscious calculation. "Permission granted, Morgan," Rivera's voice returned tight with tension. "Take the shot." 6 months earlier, Hannah Whitaker had been stacking hay bales under the endless Montana sky, her rifle propped against a fence post as she took aim at targets that threatened her family's struggling ranch. The Winchester .270 had belonged to her grandfather, then her father, and now rested naturally in her hands, as if it had been crafted specifically for her grip. "Hannah Grace Morgan, you get those chores finished before you start target shooting." Her mother's voice carried across the fields, tinged with the same resignation that had colored most of their conversations since the bank notice arrived. Morgan Ranch, 3,000 acres of rolling hills and stubborn dreams, was bleeding money faster than a gut-shot deer. Cattle prices had plummeted. The drought had lasted 2 years longer than anyone predicted, and the bank wanted answers her family didn't have. Hannah lined up her shot on a prairie dog, poking its head above a distant mound, calculating wind distance and drop in the split second between breath and trigger pull. The crack of the rifle echoed across the valley. 800 yards away, the prairie dog disappeared. "Show off," muttered her younger brother Alex, appearing with a bucket of oats for the horses. At 16, Alex had inherited their father's broad shoulders and their mother's practical stubbornness, but he lacked Hannah's supernatural ability with a rifle. "Dad wants to know if you're coming to town for the recruiter meeting," he said. Hannah lowered her rifle, studying the distant hills where her shot had found its mark. "What recruiter meeting? Army sending someone to the high school. Graduation's next week, and half the seniors don't have college money or job prospects." Alex's voice carried the same worried undertone that had plagued their household for months. "Mom thinks it might be worth hearing what they have to say." The idea of leaving Montana, of trading these endless skies and familiar mountains for military bases and foreign deserts, should have felt wrong. Instead, as Hannah shouldered her rifle and followed Alex toward the house, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months possibility. That evening, the Morgan family gathered around their kitchen table, the same scarred oak surface where 3 generations had planned their futures and weathered their crises. Hannah's father, Thomas Morgan, spread papers across the wood grain, his calloused hands moving between bank statements and foreclosure notices with practiced resignation. "The numbers don't lie," Thomas said quietly, his weathered face reflecting 45 years of Montana winters. "We've got maybe 6 months before the bank takes the ranch. I can pick up more shifts at the lumber mill, but it won't be enough." Hannah's mother, Margaret, reached across to squeeze her husband's hand. At 42, Margaret Morgan had the kind of quiet strength that came from raising children in hard country and making impossible budgets stretch to cover basic necessities. "We'll figure something out. We always do. The Army's offering signing bonuses," Hannah said, suddenly surprising herself with the words. "The recruiter said exceptional shooters can qualify for specialized programs with enhanced benefits." Thomas Morgan looked up sharply. "Hannah, you're 18 years old. You've never been further from home than Billings home. And I can outshoot every hunter in 3 counties, Dad," Hannah replied, meeting her father's gaze steadily. "Grandpa Richard taught me that skill is currency. Maybe it's time I spent some of mine." The silence stretched long enough for the grandfather clock in the hallway to chime 9 times. Finally, Margaret Morgan spoke. "What kind of specialized program?" Hannah had spent the afternoon researching military sniper schools and marksmanship programs, her laptop balanced on her knees as she sat on the porch swing. "Sniper Training Army Marksmanship Unit, Special Operations Support." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "The kind of programs that come with substantial financial compensation and educational benefits." Alex leaned forward, his eyes bright with something between excitement and worry. "You mean like military sniper school? That's serious stuff, Hannah." "I'm a serious shooter," Hannah replied simply, "and serious problems require serious solutions." Thomas Morgan pushed back from the table, walking to the window that overlooked the fields where 4 generations of his family had worked the land. "Your great-grandfather fought in World War II. Your grandfather served during the Cold War. I did 2 tours in Desert Storm." He turned back to face his daughter, his expression unreadable. "Military service changes you, Hannah. It takes something from you, even when it gives something back." "Maybe," Hannah said quietly, "but sitting here watching the ranch die slowly is taking something from all of us." The recruitment meeting at Blackwater High School took place in the same gymnasium where Hannah had played basketball for 4 years, where she'd graduated valedictorian 3 days earlier, where she'd given the speech about pursuing dreams despite obstacles. Sergeant First Class Michael Hayes stood behind a folding table covered with brochures and laptop computers, his Army dress uniform crisp, despite the late spring heat. Hayes was perhaps 35 with the kind of controlled intensity that came from years of military precision. His presentation covered standard enlistment options, military occupational specialties, and educational benefits. But when Hannah approached his table afterward carrying a folder of her shooting records and competition scores, his entire demeanor shifted. "These scores real?" Hayes asked, scanning the documentation Hannah had compiled. 800-yard groups under 2 inches. Consistent hits at 1 mile with hunting rifles. Win compensation calculations at this level. "Every score is witnessed and documented," Hannah replied. "I can demonstrate if necessary." Hayes's eyes narrowed with professional interest. "Miss Morgan, how much do you know about military sniper programs?" "I know they're looking for exceptional marksmen with the mental discipline to perform under extreme pressure. I know the Army Marksmanship Unit represents the pinnacle of military shooting sports. And I know that specialized programs come with specialized compensation. They also come with specialized risks," Hayes said seriously. "Sniper training isn't summer camp. It's designed to break people who think they're tough enough to handle anything. The dropout rate exceeds 70%. Hannah met his gaze without flinching. "Sergeant, I've been supporting my family's ranch since I was 12 years old. I put meat on our table through hunting since I was 14. I've won every shooting competition within 200 miles of here for the past 3 years. I don't break easily." Hayes studied her for a long moment, taking in her steady hands, her direct eye contact, and the quiet confidence that radiated from her small frame. At 5'6" and 130, Hannah Morgan didn't look like the typical military recruit, but something in her bearing suggested depths that weren't immediately visible. "Tell you what," Hayes said finally, "there's a qualifying shoot happening at Fort Harrison next week. Prospective candidates for advanced marksmanship programs. You show up with documented proof of your shooting abilities, pass the initial screening, and I'll personally ensure your application gets serious consideration." What's the screening involve? Standard marksmanship evaluation at distances up to 800 meters. Basic physical fitness requirements. Psychological evaluation to assess suitability for high-stress military occupations. Hayes handed her a business card along with several recruitment packets. "Miss Morgan, I'll be honest with you. In 15 years of recruiting, I've never seen civilian shooting scores like yours from someone your age. But military sniping is about more than accuracy. It's about mental fortitude, emotional control, and the ability to make life or death decisions under extreme pressure." Hannah pocketed the business card and extended her hand for a firm handshake. "Sergeant Hayes, I appreciate your honesty, but I didn't drive 4 hours to Blackwater to hear about why I might not qualify. I came here to find out how to enlist." As Hannah turned to leave, Hayes called after her. "One more thing, Morgan. Your grandfather was Richard Morgan, served in intelligence operations during the Cold War." "Correct." Hannah stopped surprised. "Yes, how did you know that?" Hayes's expression revealed nothing. "Just making conversation. Military families interest me." The drive back to the ranch gave Hannah 3 hours to contemplate the magnitude of what she was considering. The Montana landscape rolled past her pickup trucks, windows, endless wheat fields, distant mountain ranges, and the kind of open space that made a person feel simultaneously infinite and insignificant. This was home, the only world she'd ever known, and leaving it would mean abandoning everything familiar. But staying would mean watching her family lose everything they'd built across 4 generations. Her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend Rebecca Willis, who was heading to the University of Montana in the fall on a partial scholarship. "How did the military thing go? Still think you're crazy, but I support you." Hannah smiled despite her churning thoughts. Rebecca had been her closest friend since elementary school, the steady voice of reason to Hannah's impulsive decisiveness. They'd spent countless hours together in the mountains hiking and camping, with Rebecca providing the practical planning while Hannah handled the hunting and outdoor survival aspects of their adventures. Another text appeared. "Seriously though, you're one of the smartest people I know. Military might be perfect for you, but just make sure you're doing it for the right reasons." The right reasons. Hannah considered this as she turned onto the gravel road leading to her family's property. Was financial necessity the right reason? Was the desire to use her shooting skills professionally the right reason? Was the restless feeling that Montana, despite its beauty, was too small to contain her ambitions the right reason? Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory. "Skill without purpose is just showing off, Hannah. But skill applied to something important can change the world." The next morning, Hannah woke before dawn, as was her habit. But instead of heading straight to the barn for chores, she found herself drawn to the old storage shed at the far edge of the property. The wooden structure had been built by her great-grandfather and in recent years had been used mainly for storing old equipment and family keepsakes deemed too valuable to discard but not practical enough to keep in the house. Hannah had always loved the musty, timeless smell of the place. As a child, she'd spent hours exploring its corners, discovering forgotten treasures from earlier generations of Morgans. Now, with the possibility of leaving the ranch for military service, she felt a sudden need to reconnect with her family's history. The padlock was stiff with disuse, but the key still turned in the mechanism. Inside, dust motes danced in the beams of early morning light that filtered through the weathered planks. Hannah moved carefully among stacked furniture, old trunks, and farm implements that hadn't been used in decades. In the back corner sat an old wooden chest she recognized as her grandfather Richard's military footlocker. She'd seen it before, but had never explored its contents. Today, something drew her to it. The brass latch was tarnished but opened easily under her touch. Inside lay neatly folded uniforms, medals in velvet cases, and a stack of letters tied with faded ribbon. But what caught Hannah's eye was a leather-bound journal wedged against the side of the trunk. She pulled it free, noticing how the binding was worn smooth from handling. Opening it, she saw page after page of handwritten notes, diagrams, and calculations in her grandfather's distinctive script. As she leafed through the journal, Hannah realized she was looking at detailed ballistic calculations, trajectory charts, and environmental adjustment tables far more sophisticated than anything she would have expected from a Cold War-era veteran. Many of the notes referenced shooting positions and techniques she'd never heard of, despite her extensive reading on marksmanship. Her eyes widened at some of the formula's calculations for spindrift compensation at ranges beyond 1,000 yards, humidity density adjustments that weren't standard practice until decades later, and complex trigonometric functions accounting for firing at extreme angles. These were advanced concepts that even modern snipers struggled with, yet her grandfather had been working them out by hand in the 1960s. A yellowed newspaper clipping fell from between the pages. It showed a young man in uniform being decorated by a stern-looking officer. The caption read, "Lieutenant Richard Morgan receives commendation for exceptional service, Eastern Europe, 1968." The article mentioned only that Lieutenant Morgan had provided crucial tactical support during a sensitive operation, with no specific details. Hannah continued exploring the trunk and discovered a false bottom. Beneath it lay a folder marked "Classified" in faded red letters in a small metal box. The folder contained documents so old the typewritten text had begun to fade. She scanned the pages quickly, her eyes widening as she read. Lieutenant Richard Morgan, designated marksman with Project Oracle, is credited with the elimination of General Mikhail Baranov at a confirmed distance of 1,700 yards. This engagement, conducted on September 12, 1968, represents the longest confirmed sniper elimination in current military records. Due to the sensitive nature of the operation and potential intelligence implications, all details are classified top secret. No public recognition or official record of this achievement is to be maintained in standard military files. Hannah's hands trembled. Her grandfather had been a military sniper, one who had set records, and no one in the family had ever mentioned it. She'd learned to shoot from him, spent countless hours with him on the ranch's improvised firing range, and he'd never once hinted at this history. The small metal box contained a worn brass compass and a set of dog tags. Engraved on the back of the compass was a simple message: "True aim comes from the heart, not just the eye. RM." Hannah sat back on her heels, dust swirling around her in the half-light of the shed. She felt as though she'd discovered a secret passage in a house she thought she knew completely. Her grandfather, the gentle, patient man who had taught her to shoot prairie dogs and mule deer, had once used those same skills to change the course of history. As she carefully replaced the items, she noticed one more document tucked into a side pocket of the trunk. It was a medical report stamped "Confidential," detailing an unusual genetic test. The technical language was difficult to parse, but certain phrases jumped out: abnormal ocular neural processing, enhanced visual spatial cognition, and genetic markers consistent with superior depth perception and temporal processing speed. A handwritten note at the bottom, signed by someone with the title Chief Medical Officer, read, "Subject demonstrates abilities consistent with previous cases in the Oracle program. Recommendation: continued monitoring of bloodline for potential recurrence of the genetic anomaly." Hannah's mind raced. Was this talking about her grandfather? Some kind of special genetic trait that made him an exceptional marksman? And what was this Oracle program? Whatever it was, it seemed the military had been interested enough in her grandfather's abilities to conduct specialized genetic testing, something that would have been extraordinarily unusual for a Cold War soldier. She carefully returned everything to its place, making sure to position items exactly as she'd found them. But she couldn't resist slipping the compass into her pocket. Something told her she might need its guidance in the days ahead. As she locked the shed behind her, Hannah felt a strange mixture of pride, confusion, and determination. Her decision to pursue military marksmanship no longer seemed like merely a practical solution to her family's financial problems. It felt like she was following a path that had been waiting for her all along, a path her grandfather had walked before her, leaving silent markers for her to find when the time was right. The sound of tires on gravel drew Hannah's attention. A black government sedan was coming up the drive, unusual for this early hour. She walked toward the house, watching as the car parked and an elderly man emerged. He was tall and straight-backed despite his age, with a military bearing that was unmistakable even in civilian clothes. "Hannah Morgan," the man called as she approached. "James Wilson. I served with your grandfather." He extended a hand that was gnarled with age but still firm in its grip. I've been meaning to pay my respects to the Morgan family for some time. Hannah studied the man closely. He appeared to be in his early 70s with steel gray hair and piercing blue eyes that missed nothing. You knew my grandfather during his service. Indeed, I did. Wilson's gaze swept over the ranch, taking in the mountains beyond. Richard and I worked together for many years. Special operations primarily, the kind that don't make it into the history books. Would you like to come inside? My parents should be up by now. Wilson nodded, following Hannah toward the house. As they walked, he asked casually, "Do you shoot, Miss Morgan? Your grandfather was quite the marksman." Hannah felt a chill run down her spine, remembering the documents she'd just discovered. "Yes, sir. Grandpa Richard taught me." "And how good are you?" "Good enough to feed the family when times are tough," Hannah replied carefully. Wilson smiled, a knowing expression that suggested he understood exactly what she wasn't saying. "Your grandfather used to say the same thing. Good enough for what needs doing. But between us, Richard Morgan was the finest shooter I ever saw. Did things with a rifle that defied explanation." Inside the house, Thomas Morgan was surprised but pleased to meet his father's old colleague. After introductions and coffee, Wilson asked if he might speak with Hannah privately. Her parents exchanged glances but agreed, and Hannah led Wilson to the front porch. "I understand you're considering military service," Wilson said without preamble once they were seated. Hannah's surprise must have shown on her face because Wilson chuckled. "Small towns, Miss Morgan. Word travels, especially when someone with your particular talents expresses interest in specialized programs." "My particular talents." Wilson reached into his jacket and removed a folder. "Your competition scores, your hunting success rates, your uncanny ability to compensate for wind at distances where most shooters can barely see the target." He set the folder on the table between them. "Tell me, have you found your grandfather's journal yet?" Hannah froze. "How could you possibly know about that?" "Because I put it there," Wilson said simply. "After Richard died, certain items needed to be preserved. Things too sensitive for official channels, but too important to destroy. I made sure they found their way to where they belonged with his family." "The Oracle program," Hannah said quietly. "What was it?" Wilson studied her for a long moment as if making a crucial decision. Is the most classified marksmanship program in American military history. A small cadre of individuals with unique genetic traits that enhance visual processing and spatial awareness. People who can make shots that others consider impossible." He leaned forward. "People like your grandfather, and I suspect people like you." The medical report mentioned a genetic anomaly. "Less than 1 in 5 million people carry the Oracle marker," Wilson explained. "It allows the brain to process visual information differently, to calculate trajectories and environmental factors at an intuitive level. Most never discover their potential because they never engage in activities that would reveal it. Your grandfather was exceptional, even among oracles. And now, here you are." Hannah's mind whirled with the implications. "Why are you telling me this now?" Wilson's expression grew grave. "Because we need you, Miss Morgan. The program continues under different names and administrative structures, but the mission remains the same: to deploy exceptional talents against threats that cannot be addressed through conventional means." He paused. "There's a particular threat emerging that requires the Oracle gift. A man named Ivan Petrov." "Who is he?" "The son of Anatoly Petrov, a Soviet operative your grandfather encountered during the Cold War. Ivan is former KGB, now running a terrorist network with plans to acquire and deploy radiological weapons against American interests. Conventional intelligence and military assets have failed to neutralize him. He operates from extreme distances, moving frequently, always protected. We need someone who can make the kind of shot only an Oracle can attempt." Hannah felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. An hour ago, her biggest concern had been saving the family ranch. Now she was discussing classified military programs and international terrorism with a stranger who somehow knew more about her abilities than she did herself. "The qualifying shoot at Fort Harrison," she said slowly. "That's connected to this, isn't it?" Wilson nodded. "A necessary formality to bring you into the program officially. But make no mistake, Miss Morgan, your grandfather's legacy has already opened doors. The only question is whether you're willing to walk through them." Hannah reached into her pocket and felt the smooth brass of her grandfather's compass. "Why me? There must be other candidates." There are always candidates, Wilson agreed, but the Oracle gene is vanishingly rare, and those who carry it must also possess the temperament, the discipline, and the moral fortitude to use it properly. Your grandfather saw those qualities in you from the time you were a child. He believed you would follow in his footsteps when the time came. He leaned back in his chair. And there's something else. What? Wilson's eyes held hers steadily. Anatoly Petrov was your grandfather's final assignment, the one he didn't complete. The old man's voice lowered. Richard's last mission was in East Germany, 1985. He had a shot at Anatoly Petrov from 1,700 yards identical to the shot that made him a legend in '68. But conditions weren't optimal. His spotter, Frank Collins, advised him to take the shot anyway. The bullet missed by inches, only wounding Petrov. The operation was compromised, and Richard was killed during the extraction. Hannah felt as if she'd been struck. No one had ever told her how her grandfather died. The family had been informed only that he'd passed away during a government assignment overseas. Petrov's son Ivan has his father's cunning and his father's grudge, Wilson continued. He knows about the Oracle program. He's been eliminating former members one by one. We believe he's planning something significant, but before he moves, he wants to ensure no one with Richard Morgan's abilities remains to stop him. So this is personal for him, Hannah said quietly. As it may be for you now, Wilson acknowledged, but vengeance is a poor foundation for what lies ahead. Your grandfather understood that precision shooting at this level isn't about hatred or even justice. It's about necessity, the removal of one individual to save countless others. He stood looking out over the ranch. Think about what I've said. If you decide to proceed, I'll see you at Fort Harrison next week. If not, this conversation never happened. As Wilson prepared to leave, Hannah asked one final question. The compass, the inscription about true aim coming from the heart. What did he mean by that? Wilson smiled, a genuine expression that softened his weathered features. Richard believed that at extreme distances, when all variables have been calculated, when equipment and training have been pushed to their limits, there remains an element that can't be quantified. A moment of perfect convergence when heart, mind, eye, and bullet become one. He placed a hand on her shoulder. Your grandfather could feel that moment. I believe you can too. After Wilson left, Hannah returned to the shed, this time bringing her father. Together, they opened Richard Morgan's footlocker, and Hannah showed him the journal, the classified documents, the evidence of a life her grandfather had kept hidden from his family. Thomas Morgan read in silence, his expression shifting from surprise to pride to something like awe. Dad never talked about his work, he said finally. I knew he did something important, something classified, but this, he shook his head. A 1,700-yard shot in 1968, that would still be extraordinary today. Wilson says I have the same genetic trait, Hannah said, that I could be part of the same program, that they need someone with these abilities for a specific mission. Her father looked at her sharply. Hannah, this goes far beyond standard military service. This sounds like black operations, the kind of work that never makes it into official records. I know, but if what Wilson says is true, if this Petrov is really planning attacks on American soil, and if I'm one of the few people who might be able to stop him. She let the sentence hang unfinished. Thomas was silent for a long moment. What does your heart tell you? Hannah closed her fingers around her grandfather's compass, feeling its weight, its history. That this is what I was meant to do. That all those years Grandpa spent teaching me to shoot weren't just about hunting or sport. He was preparing me for something more important. Her father nodded slowly. Your grandfather was the wisest man I've ever known. If he believed in you this strongly, who am I to stand in your way? He placed his hand over hers. But promise me one thing. Come home when it's done. Whatever this mission is, whatever they ask of you, remember that your family is here waiting. I promise, Dad. The Fort Harrison qualifying shoot took place on a gray Tuesday morning in early June, with Hannah arriving before dawn to find 23 other candidates already assembling their equipment. The group was predominantly male, mostly college-aged, with several obvious military brats who carried themselves with inherited confidence. Hannah set up her shooting position, methodically arranging her gear with the same careful attention to detail she'd applied to ranch work for years. Her rifle was older than most of the competition's equipment, the same Winchester .270 she'd used for hunting, but she'd modified and tuned it until every component performed flawlessly. "First time at one of these evaluations?" asked the shooter beside her, a tall redhead with expensive equipment and a slight Texas accent. "I'm Madison Hayes, University of Texas ROTC program." "Hannah Morgan," she replied, adjusting her scope's focus. "And yes, first time." Madison looked over Hannah's rifle setup with barely concealed condescension. "Hunting rifle, huh? Interesting. Most of us are using precision target rifles for this kind of evaluation. That old 270 won't hold up past 600 yards against our match-grade equipment. Most people aren't consistently hitting 800-yard targets with hunting rifles," Hannah replied pleasantly. "But I suppose we'll see how everyone performs." The evaluation began with standard marksmanship tests at 200, 400, and 600 meters. Hannah's shots grouped tightly at each distance, her technique drawing attention from the evaluating instructors. Master Sergeant James Crawford, a lean man in his 40s with the kind of weathered hands that spoke of decades handling weapons, began timing Hannah's target acquisitions and noting her shooting positions. "Morgan," Crawford called out after her 600-meter string. "Your shooting stance, I don't recognize it from standard military training." "Self-taught techniques, Sergeant. Hunting in Montana requires adapting to terrain and conditions that don't always accommodate textbook positions." Crawford made additional notes on his evaluation sheet. "Show me your 800-meter grouping." The 800-meter target stretched the abilities of several candidates. Hannah watched Madison Hayes struggle with wind compensation, saw two candidates fail to achieve acceptable accuracy, and noticed one shooter actually hit an adjacent target frame entirely. When her turn came, Hannah settled into a prone position, checked her scope settings, and began her breathing routine. The first shot struck dead center. The second shot, adjusted for a wind change, hit less than an inch away. The third, fourth, and fifth shots created a group that could be covered with a quarter. "Jesus Christ," muttered one of the other candidates. "Did she just shoot a sub-MOA group at 800 meters with a hunting rifle?" Master Sergeant Crawford lowered his spotting scope and walked over to Hannah's position. "Morgan, where did you learn to read wind at extended range?" "Hunting elk in mountain conditions," Hannah replied, beginning to clean her rifle. "Wind in the mountains changes constantly. You learn to read it, or you go home empty-handed." "And where did you learn to compensate for temperature and altitude variables?" Hannah paused her cleaning routine. "Trial and error mostly, some internet research, lots of practice." She looked up at Crawford. "Is that a problem, Sergeant?" Crawford's expression was unreadable. "Morgan, what you just did doesn't happen by accident. Sub-minute of angle accuracy at 800 meters requires understanding of ballistics, atmospheric conditions, and rifle mechanics that most people don't develop without formal training." "I had formal training," Hannah said. "My grandfather taught me to shoot when I was 8 years old. My father taught me to hunt when I was 12. Montana taught me everything else." Crawford studied her for a moment, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Your grandfather was Richard Morgan." It wasn't a question. Hannah felt a chill run down her spine. "Yes, did you know him?" "No," Crawford said a little too quickly, "but I've heard the name." He moved on to the next shooter without further explanation. As the day progressed through physical evaluations and preliminary psychological assessments, Hannah became aware of subtle differences in how she was being treated compared to other candidates. The instructors watched her more closely. Additional tests were added to her evaluation. Questions probed deeper into her background and motivations. By late afternoon, she was called into a private briefing room where James Wilson waited alongside a woman Hannah hadn't seen before. She was perhaps 50, with short salt and pepper hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. "Hannah Morgan, meet Colonel Catherine Rivera, Special Operations Command. She oversees the program we discussed at your ranch." Rivera extended her hand. "Impressive performance today, Miss Morgan, though not unexpected given your lineage." "Thank you, ma'am. Please sit down." Rivera gestured to a chair across from her. "What has Mr. Wilson told you about why you're here?" "That I may carry the same genetic marker as my grandfather. That this marker is related to something called the Oracle program. That you need someone with these abilities to neutralize a specific threat." Rivera nodded. "Concise and accurate. Let me fill in some details." She opened a laptop and turned it to face Hannah. On the screen was a medical readout Hannah didn't understand. This is your genetic profile derived from samples we collected during your physical evaluation today. The highlighted section confirms what we suspected: you carry the Oracle gene just as your grandfather did. Hannah stared at the screen at the scientific confirmation of what she'd begun to suspect about herself. What exactly does this gene do? It creates unique neural pathways in the visual cortex, Rivera explained. Essentially, your brain processes spatial relationships, movement, and light differently than 99.99% of the population. You perceive minute variations in wind effect by how it moves objects at distance. You instinctively calculate bullet drop without conscious mathematics. You can sense barometric pressure changes that might affect a shot. And this is why I've always been a good shot. Wilson leaned forward. Good is an understatement, Miss Morgan. You just outperformed military snipers with years of training using a hunting rifle against their match-grade equipment. What you have isn't learned skill, though. That certainly helps refine it. What you have is a fundamental difference in how your brain interprets the physical world. The Oracle program has existed in various forms since the early Cold War, Rivera continued. Never more than a dozen active members at any time, all operating under deep cover for various military and intelligence agencies. Your grandfather was among the most exceptional talents we've ever documented. Until today, Ishidati, Wilson added quietly. Rivera closed the laptop. Hannah, we're prepared to offer you immediate acceptance into the most selective shooting program in the military with a signing bonus substantial enough to resolve your family's financial difficulties. In return, it would require your commitment to a specific mission once your training is complete. Ivan Petrov, Hannah said. Yes, a man who has proven impossible to reach through conventional means. A man responsible for attacks that have killed hundreds of civilians. A man planning worse. And you believe I can eliminate him when others have failed. We believe you're the only person alive with a realistic chance of making the shot that will be required, Wilson said. Based on intelligence about his operational patterns, the only viable shooting position would require an engagement at nearly 3 miles, far beyond what any conventional military sniper would even attempt. Hannah felt the weight of her grandfather's compass in her pocket. The compass of a man who had made history with a shot that should have been impossible, only to fall attempting to repeat that miracle years later. If I agree, she said slowly, I want to know everything about my grandfather, about the Oracle program, about what happened on his last mission. No more secrets. Rivera and Wilson exchanged glances. Complete disclosure, Rivera agreed. And one more thing. The trainer we've selected for you, the man who will prepare you for what lies ahead. Frank Collins, your grandfather's last spotter, the man who advised him to take the shot that cost him his life. He's been waiting 35 years for a chance at redemption. Hannah thought of the ranch of her family's struggle, of the legacy hidden in her grandfather's footlocker. She thought of the skills she'd spent her life developing, skills that now revealed themselves to be more than just talent and practice, but a genetic gift passed down through generations. When do we start? Rivera smiled. We already have. Welcome to Project Oracle, Miss Morgan. Dawn broke over the Wyoming plains, bathing the landscape in gold, as Hannah Morgan followed the unmarked gravel road that wound through rolling grasslands. The GPS coordinates Wilson had provided led her to what appeared to be an ordinary horse ranch, white fences enclosing paddocks where thoroughbreds grazed peacefully, a weathered barn standing sentinel against the distant mountains. Only the subtle security cameras mounted discreetly on fence posts and the reinforced gate suggested this was anything but a typical equestrian facility. Hannah stopped at the checkpoint where an armed guard in civilian clothing verified her credentials before allowing her through. Welcome to the nest, the guard said, handing back her identification. Mr. Wilson is expecting you. Follow the road to the main house. Hannah drove slowly, taking in what would be her home for the next several months. The main house turned out to be a sprawling ranch-style building with a broad porch and rocking chairs that reminded her of Montana. Wilson stood waiting, his tall frame silhouetted against the morning sun. Right on time, he said as Hannah stepped from her truck. You'll find punctuality is a virtue here. One of many you'll need to cultivate. I didn't expect a horse ranch, Hannah said, shouldering her duffel bag. Wilson smiled thinly. Appearances matter in our line of work. To the outside world, this is Clearwater Equestrian, a breeding operation for championship quarter horses. To a select few, it's the most advanced marksmanship training facility in the Western Hemisphere. He gestured toward the barn. Your real training begins below. The interior of the barn contained actual horses and equipment, the scent of hay and leather authentic. But Wilson led Hannah to what appeared to be a supply closet at the rear. He placed his palm against an unremarkable wooden panel, and a hidden scanner hummed to life. Identity confirmed. Welcome back, Director Wilson, a computerized voice announced as the entire back wall swung inward, revealing an elevator. Director, Hannah asked as they stepped inside. Someone has to oversee what remains of Project Oracle, Wilson said. I've held that responsibility since your grandfather's time. The elevator descended smoothly and Hannah's ears popped as they dropped what must have been hundreds of feet below ground. When the doors opened, she found herself in a facility that bore no resemblance to the rustic ranch above, gleaming corridors with reinforced doors, state-of-the-art surveillance systems, and the unmistakable clinical efficiency of a Black Ops training center. How much of this was here when my grandfather trained? Hannah asked, following Wilson down the main corridor. None of it. The original facility was in Nevada. We relocated after the Cold War ended and budgets were restructured. This installation was completed in 2002, designed specifically for the next generation of the program. They passed shooting ranges, physical training areas, and what appeared to be medical labs. Personnel in both military and civilian attire nodded respectfully to Wilson as they passed. Hannah noticed that several stopped to stare at her, their expressions varying from curiosity to skepticism. Wilson stopped before a door marked Tactical Planning. Inside, a man and a woman were studying a topographical display showing mountainous terrain. They looked up as Wilson and Hannah entered. Hannah Morgan, meet your team. Sarah Jenkins, Intelligence Analysis and Mission Planning. Marcus Reed, Observation and Environmental Calculation. Sarah Jenkins was perhaps 35 with short auburn hair and alert eyes that missed nothing. She extended her hand with a professional smile. The famous granddaughter. I've studied your family file extensively. Impressive genetics. Marcus Reed was older, around 50, with the weathered complexion and quiet intensity of someone who had spent years in harsh field conditions. His handshake was firm, his assessment of Hannah open and direct. I was Richard Morgan's last spotter's assistant. Learn from the best. Let's see if it runs in the family. Where's Collins? Hannah asked, looking around. Frank doesn't attend briefings, Wilson explained. He prefers to focus on practical instruction. He nodded toward the display. This is your training ground for the next phase. The Wyoming High Country offers terrain similar to what you'll encounter in Afghanistan. Variable winds, elevation changes, and temperature differentials. When do I meet him? Hannah asked. When he decides you're ready, Sarah replied. Frank has his own way of doing things. Has since the incident with your grandfather. Before Hannah could press for details, the door opened again. A man in his 60s entered, his bearing unmistakably military despite the casual clothing. He moved with the deliberate precision of someone accustomed to controlling every aspect of his environment, his eyes cold and assessing as they settled on Hannah. So this is Richard's grandchild, he said, his voice a graveled rasp that spoke of years of command. Doesn't look like much. Wilson turned. Hannah, this is Captain Frank Collins, retired. He'll be overseeing your advanced training personally. Collins circled Hannah slowly, taking in every detail of her stance, her posture, the way she held herself under scrutiny. Wilson says you can shoot, that your scores at Harrison were exceptional. His tone made it clear he remained unconvinced. I've trained snipers for 30 years, seen talent come and go. Most wash out when it matters. Hannah met his gaze steadily. I won't wash out. That's what they all say. Collins stopped in front of her, close enough that Hannah could see the network of fine lines around his eyes, the signature of someone who had spent thousands of hours squinting through scopes in harsh sunlight. You know who I am. What I did. You were my grandfather's spotter. You advised him to take the shot that killed him. The room went silent. Sarah and Marcus exchanged glances. Wilson's expression remained carefully neutral. Collins didn't flinch from the accusation. That's right, I made a call. The wrong call, as it turned out. Richard trusted my judgment, and it got him killed. His eyes held Hannah's, searching for something. You want to know why I agreed to train you? I assume because you're the best qualified. I'm the most motivated, Collins corrected. For 35 years, I've lived with the knowledge that I sent the finest shooter I ever knew to his death. I don't intend to repeat that mistake. He turned to Wilson. We start at dawn tomorrow. Long-range installation 3. And I want her alone for the first week. No observers, no interference. Wilson nodded. Understood. But remember, Captain, we have a timeline. Ivan Petrov won't wait while you indulge your training methods. Petrov has waited 35 years for his revenge, Collins said grimly. He can wait a few more weeks while I make sure she's ready. He turned and left without another word, the door closing firmly behind him. Sarah let out a breath. Well, that was Frank being sociable. Just wait until he starts training you. Is he always like that? Hannah asked. Only with people he thinks might be worth his time, Marcus said. The rest don't even merit his attention. Wilson gestured toward another door. Let's get you settled. Tomorrow will come early, and Frank doesn't tolerate tardiness. Hannah's quarters were Spartan but comfortable, a small bedroom, bathroom, and study area equipped with technical manuals on ballistics, meteorology, and marksmanship theory. After Wilson left, she unpacked her few belongings, carefully placing her grandfather's compass on the nightstand. She was studying a manual on advanced wind-reading techniques when a knock came at her door. Sarah Jenkins stood outside holding a thick file folder. Thought you might want this, she said, entering and placing the folder on Hannah's desk. Your grandfather's operational history, 30 years of missions, evaluations, and after-action reports. Hannah stared at the folder. Wilson said I'd get full disclosure. Wilson says a lot of things, Sarah replied, sitting on the edge of the bed, but he's a spy master at heart. Always keeps something in reserve. She tapped the folder. This isn't the official version he planned to give you. This is the unredacted file I pulled from the secure archives, because I think you deserve to know exactly who Richard Morgan was and what the Oracle program really did during the Cold War. Why would you do this for me? Sarah's expression softened slightly. Because I've been with this program for 12 years. I've watched it change from a precision instrument to a blunt weapon. I've seen what happens when we deploy oracles without complete information. She stood. Read it tonight, before Collins begins reshaping you into what the program needs. After Sarah left, Hannah opened the folder and began reading. The documents inside told a story far more complex than the sanitized version Wilson had shared. Project Oracle had begun not as a marksmanship program, but as a classified study of genetic anomalies that might create enhanced human assets for intelligence operations. The Oracle gene, first identified in 1951, had been discovered accidentally during research into visual processing disorders. Scientists realized that certain individuals possessed neural pathways that process spatial relationships and movement in ways that defied conventional understanding. Further research revealed that these individuals, when trained in marksmanship, could achieve results that seemed to violate the laws of physics. Richard Morgan had been recruited in 1962 after his exceptional performance in Army basic training caught the attention of program scouts. His genetic testing confirmed the presence of the Oracle marker, and he was diverted from conventional military service into the classified program. What followed was 3 decades of operations so sensitive that most remain classified even within the file black ink, obscuring locations, targets, and outcomes. But certain missions stood out in vivid detail, including the 1968 operation in Prague that had made her grandfather a legend within the program. As Soviet forces prepared to crush the Prague Spring reform movement, intelligence identified General Mikhail Baranov as the architect of a planned crackdown that would cost thousands of lives. With conventional assassination methods impossible due to Baranov's security project, Oracle deployed Richard Morgan to a position 1,700 yards from where the general would review troops prior to the operation. The shot, unprecedented at that distance with the technology of the time, killed Baranov instantly. The Soviet crackdown proceeded, but with significantly reduced casualties due to the more moderate approach of Baranov's replacement. Hannah read through operation after operation, a hidden history of the Cold War, as seen through the scope of her grandfather's rifle. Moscow, Berlin, Havana, Saigon, places where history pivoted on single bullets fired by men whose names would never appear in official records. The final pages detailed Richard Morgan's last mission, Operation Checkmate, East Germany, 1985. The target, Anatoly Petrov, a KGB operative running a network of assassins targeting Western intelligence assets. The intelligence suggested Petrov was planning a major operation that would compromise NATO security arrangements and potentially trigger armed conflict. Morgan and Collins established a position in an abandoned watchtower near the East German border. The shot would be at extreme range, 1750 yards, matching Morgan's previous record, and through difficult environmental conditions. Collins's handwritten notes describe gusty winds, shifting light and temperature variations that made the shot highly challenging but theoretically possible. Collins had ultimately advised taking the shot despite suboptimal conditions, citing the limited window of opportunity and the critical nature of the target. Morgan's bullet struck Petrov in the shoulder rather than the intended center mass wounding, but not killing him. Within minutes, East German border guards located their position. During the extraction, Richard Morgan was killed, covering Collins's escape. The final entry was a psychological evaluation of Frank Collins conducted 3 months after the incident. The military psychiatrist had diagnosed severe survivor's guilt and recommended Collins's removal from active duty. Collins had reportedly responded, "I won't leave until I've trained his replacement. I owe Richard that much." Hannah closed the file as dawn approached her mind, filled with the weight of history, both national and personal, that had led her to this underground facility in Wyoming. She understood now why Collins had agreed to train her, why Wilson had sought her out, why the program had monitored her family for generations. This wasn't just about a terrorist named Ivan Petrov. This was about completion, about finishing what her grandfather had started, about legacy in its most literal sense. When she finally slept, her dreams were filled with impossible shots across impossible distances in the faces of men who had changed history with single bullets. Frank Collins was waiting at the firing range when Hannah arrived at exactly 0600 hours. The long-range installation turned out to be a remarkable facility, an underground range extending more than a mile with sophisticated environmental controls that could simulate virtually any shooting condition. "Range is controlled for now," Collins said without preamble. "No wind, no temperature variation, no humidity fluctuation. Standard atmospheric pressure." He nodded toward a weapon case on the bench beside him. "That's yours for the duration." Hannah opened the case to find a precision rifle, unlike any she'd handled before, a custom-built .338 Lapua Magnum with a match-grade barrel, advanced stock system, and a scope that represented the cutting edge of optical technology. "Macmillan TAC 338, Collins explained as she examined the weapon. "Custom-built for the program. Effective range beyond 1,800 meters in capable hands." His emphasis on the last words made his skepticism clear. "Show me what Harrison saw." Hannah assembled the rifle with practiced efficiency, though the system was more complex than her familiar hunting rifles. She settled into position on the shooting bench, adjusting her stance for the weapon's different balance and weight. "Target at 800 meters, Collins said, activating the range system. A human-shaped silhouette appeared downrange, illuminated in the otherwise dimly lit tunnel. Hannah took her time familiarizing herself with the rifle's trigger pull, the scope's clarity and adjustment mechanisms, the way the weapon settled against her shoulder. When she was satisfied, she began her shooting routine, controlled breathing, gradual trigger pressure, the focus that narrowed her world to the perfect alignment of eye scope and target. The rifle cracked 5 times in rapid succession. Through the scope, Hannah could see that all 5 rounds had struck within a 2-inch circle in the target's center mass. "Again," Collins said, his expression unchanged. 1,000 meters. Hannah repeated the process as the target receded further down the range. Again, her shots grouped tightly, showing the consistency that had impressed the evaluators at Fort Harrison. 1,200 meters. The pattern continued through increasing distances, 1,400 meters, 1,600 meters, then finally 1,800 meters, the effective limit of the weapon under ideal conditions. At each distance, Hannah maintained groupings that would have been exceptional for experienced military snipers. After the final series, Collins examined the target data on a nearby monitor, his face giving away nothing. "Your technical fundamentals are solid," he acknowledged finally. "Better than most who come through here." "But," Hannah prompted, sensing his reservation, "but shooting under controlled conditions proves nothing except basic competence." Collins manipulated the range controls. "Now we add variables." The range lighting changed subtly, simulating late afternoon sunlight at an angle that created challenging shadows. Environmental systems activated, generating a 15-knot crosswind that Hannah could feel against her skin. "Variable conditions, 1,000 meters, Collins ordered. 5 rounds, 30 seconds. Hannah adjusted quickly, compensating for the wind and changed lighting conditions. Her shots still grouped well, though slightly wider than before. Again, different variables. For the next hour, Collins subjected Hannah to an increasingly difficult series of environmental challenges, gusting winds, temperature fluctuations, even simulated rain and snow. Through it all, Hannah demonstrated the adaptability that had made her exceptional on the Montana hunting grounds, instinctively adjusting for changing conditions without conscious calculation. Finally, Collins shut down the range systems. "Your grandfather could do that," he said quietly. "Adapt in real time to changing conditions. Most snipers need formulas, data calculations. Oracles feel the changes." He packed away the targeting equipment with methodical precision. "But feeling isn't enough, not where we're going." "What do you mean?" Collins fixed her with a hard stare. "You've read his file. You know what happened in East Germany. I felt the shot was possible. My instinct was wrong. Richard paid with his life." He shouldered his pack. "Follow me. Phase 2 starts now." They took the elevator to the surface and emerged into the bright Wyoming morning. A rugged SUV waited outside the barn. Collins drove them away from the main compound, following dirt tracks into the surrounding hills until they reached a remote ridgeline overlooking a vast valley. "First rule of real-world shooting," Collins said as they exited the vehicle. "Ranges are lies. Controlled environments are fantasies. The real world is chaos, and chaos is what kills you." He handed Hannah a pair of binoculars. "See that weather station on the far ridge? Range it." Hannah used the rangefinder function. "There's 2240 meters. That's your target for tomorrow, but today you study." Collins set up a portable weather station and a spotting scope. "For the next 12 hours, you'll observe and record every environmental factor affecting the space between here and that target. Wind speed and direction at various distances, temperature changes throughout the day, how mirage affects visibility as the ground heats up. 12 hours of observation for a single shot. 12 hours is nothing. In the field, we sometimes observe for days before taking a shot." Collins's voice hardened. "You think this is excessive? Your grandfather spent 36 hours in position before taking the Baronoff shot. Didn't move, barely breathed, just watching and waiting for the perfect moment." Hannah settled into position, beginning the meticulous observation process Collins demanded. Throughout the day, he offered minimal guidance, instead testing her ability to identify and interpret environmental cues independently. By sunset, Hannah had filled a notebook with detailed observations about wind patterns, temperature variations, and how they affected visibility across the valley. "We camp here tonight," Collins announced as darkness fell. "The second phase of observation is equally important: how conditions change at night, how temperature drops affect air density, how to maintain your position and readiness through hours of inactivity." They ate a sparse meal of military rations as stars appeared overhead. In the silence of the Wyoming wilderness, Collins finally spoke of something other than marksmanship. "Richard talked about you," he said, unexpectedly. "Even back then, when you were just a child. Said you had the eye, the instinct." He stared into the darkness. I didn't believe him. Thought the Oracle gene was too rare to appear again so soon in the same bloodline. "How many of us are there?" Hannah asked. "People with this ability. Active besides you, just one other confirmed Oracle gene carrier in the program now. Used to be more. Some died naturally, some were eliminated." "Eliminated?" Collins's expression darkened. "Ivan Petrov has been hunting oracles for years. His father's obsession became his. He believes we're a threat to whatever he's planning." He looked directly at Hannah. "That's why this mission matters. It's not just about stopping a terrorist. It's about survival, yours, mine, the program's." "Why does he hate the program so much?" "Because we came closer than anyone to ending his father. And because he knows what we're capable of." Collins glanced at the compass Hannah had placed beside her sleeping bag. "Richard's," Hannah nodded. "I found it in his footlocker. The inscription, 'True aim comes from the heart, not just the eye,'" Collins quoted. "He used to say that before every operation. Drove our tactical officers crazy with his philosophical approach to what they saw as pure mathematics." A rare smile briefly crossed Collins's face. But he was right. At extreme distances, when all variables have been calculated, when equipment and training have been pushed to their limits, there remains something intuitive, something that can't be taught. That's the Oracle gene, part of it. But even among carriers, there are differences. Some have enhanced visual processing, others exceptional spatial awareness. A few, like Richard, had something more, an ability to sense the perfect moment when all factors align. Collins studied Hannah with renewed intensity. Tomorrow's shot will tell us what kind you are. The next morning, Hannah woke before dawn, her body stiff from the night spent in the open, but her mind clear and focused. Collins was already up monitoring weather conditions and updating their environmental data. Storm front approaching from the northwest, he reported. Barometric pressure dropping, wind patterns shifting unpredictably. In other words, perfect training conditions. Hannah prepared, methodically checking and rechecking her equipment, reviewing her notes from the previous day's observations. The target, a steel silhouette the size of a man's chest, was barely visible on the distant ridge, a tiny speck that would challenge even the most advanced optical systems. One shot, Collins instructed. Not when I tell you, not when conditions seem right, only when you know. Hannah settled behind the rifle, entering the zone of concentration that had always come naturally to her. She felt, rather than calculated, the environmental factors, the subtle push of the wind against her skin, the way heat shimmered above the valley floor, the pressure of the approaching storm system. Minutes passed, then an hour. Collins remained silent beside her, his spotting scope trained on the distant target. The wind shifted, gusted, then briefly calmed as the atmospheric pressure continued its gradual decline. Then Hannah felt it the moment her grandfather had described in his journal, when every factor aligned in perfect harmony. Without conscious thought, her finger took up the trigger slack. The rifle's report echoed across the valley. Through her scope, Hannah saw the target rock backward as the bullet struck dead center. Hit, Collins confirmed, his voice betraying a hint of surprise despite himself. Perfect shot at 2240 meters in variable conditions. Hannah felt a surge of satisfaction, but Collins was already packing up the equipment. One shot proves nothing, he said, reverting to his stern demeanor. Now we do it again. Different location, different conditions, different time of day. For the next 2 weeks, Collins drove Hannah, relentlessly testing her abilities across the spectrum of environmental challenges Wyoming could provide. They shot from mountain ridges and howling winds, from forest blinds and driving rain, from sun-baked plateaus, where heat mirage distorted everything beyond a few hundred yards. Throughout it all, Hannah demonstrated not just technical proficiency, but the intuitive understanding of ballistics that marked a true oracle. She could feel changes in wind direction moments before they occurred, sense barometric pressure shifts that would affect bullet drop, visualize the exact path her round would take through complex environmental conditions. Between field exercises, Collins subjected her to rigorous academic training, advanced ballistic theory, meteorological analysis, and the classified history of extreme long-range shooting operations. Hannah absorbed it all, driven by a determination to master every aspect of the craft her grandfather had elevated to an art form. On the morning of the third week, Wilson appeared at the training site accompanied by Sarah Jenkins and a man Hannah hadn't met before, a military physician based on his medical kit and bearing. Progress report, Captain, Wilson requested as Collins finished a particularly grueling night shooting exercise. She's good, Collins acknowledged reluctantly. Better than good. Range estimation accurate to within 1% at extreme distances. Groupings consistently under MOA out to 1,800 meters. Adaptive response to environmental changes exceeds program standards. Then she's ready for Phase 3, Wilson said. Collins frowned. Not yet. We've only scratched the surface of... We don't have the luxury of your perfectionism, Frank, Wilson interrupted. Doctor, Kendrick needs to run the neural mapping tests, and we need to integrate her with the full team. Ivan Petrov isn't waiting while you relive your glory days with Richard. The tension between the two men was palpable. Hannah realized there was history here beyond what she'd been told, perhaps related to the unredacted files Sarah had shared. It's your program, James, Collins said finally, his voice tight with controlled anger. But remember what happened the last time you rushed an oracle into the field without adequate preparation. Circumstances are different now, Wilson replied. The threat is immediate. Dr. Kendrick stepped forward, seemingly accustomed to mediating between these two strong personalities. Perhaps we could compromise. I can begin the baseline neural scans while Captain Collins continues field training. 2 tracks running parallel. Wilson considered this, then nodded. Acceptable. Hannah, you'll report to the medical facility tomorrow morning at 0800 for initial testing. then rejoined Collins for afternoon training. What kind of testing? Hannah asked. Neural mapping, Dr. Kendrick explained. We need to understand exactly how your brain processes visual information differently from non-oracle subjects. The data helps us predict performance under various stressors and optimize your training program. After Wilson and the doctor left, Sarah lingered behind, waiting until they were out of earshot before approaching Collins and Hannah. There's something you both need to know, she said in a low voice. Intelligence intercepts suggest Petrov knows about Hannah, specifically that Richard Morgan's granddaughter has entered the program. Collins's expression darkened. How that information is classified at the highest levels, which means either someone at those levels is talking or Petrov has resources we haven't identified. Sarah handed Collins a folder. These were intercepted from a known Petrov associate in Turkey, photos of Hannah at Fort Harrison during her evaluation. Hannah felt a chill as Collins showed her the surveillance photos, crystal clear images of her shooting, walking between buildings, even sitting alone during a break. Someone had been watching her from the beginning. Does Wilson know? Collins asked. I've briefed him. He's enhanced security at the nest, but... Sarah hesitated. But he's still pushing forward with deployment, Collins finished grimly. Same old James, the mission always comes first, regardless of the risk to the asset. I'm not an asset, Hannah said sharply. I'm a volunteer who made an informed decision. Collins' expression softened slightly. That's what we all think at the beginning, Hannah, until we realize how much information was withheld to ensure that decision. Like what? Like the fact that every oracle who's gone after Petrov in the past 5 years has died, Sarah said quietly. 3 attempts, 3 failures. All experienced operators with years of field experience. Hannah absorbed this new information, trying to reconcile it with what Wilson had told her. Why wasn't I informed of this? Because Wilson is desperate, Collins said. The program is on its last legs, budget cuts, political pressure, a string of operational failures. He needs a win, and he thinks you're his best chance. He gestured toward the sniper rifle. Pack up. Training's over for today. You need rest before Kendrick starts poking around in your brain tomorrow. That night, Hannah couldn't sleep. She paced her small quarters, mind racing with questions raised by Sarah's revelations. If Wilson had withheld crucial information about previous failed attempts on Petrov, what else might he be hiding? And if 3 experienced oracles had failed, what chance did she, a novice despite her natural ability, really have? A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Marcus Reed stood outside, his expression serious. Walk with me, he said simply. Hannah followed him through the quiet underground corridors until they reached a section of the facility she hadn't visited before, a memorial wall with photographs of men and women spanning decades of the program's history. Project Oracle's fallen, Marcus explained, stopping before the display. 43 operators since 1953. Each represented the best of their generation. Each believed they were prepared for the mission they faced. He pointed to 3 photographs at the end of the display, recent additions based on their modern appearance. These are the oracles who went after Petrov. Michael Reese, 2018. Jennifer Kwan, 2020. David Alvarez, 2022. Hannah studied the faces of ordinary-looking people whose extraordinary abilities had ultimately failed to save them. What happened to them? Different circumstances, same outcome. Petrov anticipated their deployment, countered their positioning, and eliminated them before they could complete their missions. Marcus turned to face Hannah directly. I was Alvarez's spotter, watched him die when our position was compromised by information that could only have come from inside the program. You're saying there's a leak. I'm saying trust is a luxury we can't afford. Marcus's voice was low and tense. Wilson, Collins. Sarah, even me, question everything, verify what you can, and keep your own counsel on matters of operational security. Why are you telling me this? Because I promised David I wouldn't let another oracle walk into a trap. Because I owe it to your grandfather's memory. He nodded toward a photograph near the beginning of the display, a young Richard Morgan in his army uniform. And because you deserve the truth, whatever Wilson thinks about operational security. The next morning, Hannah reported to the medical facility as ordered. Dr. Kendrick turned out to be a surprisingly warm presence in the otherwise sterile environment, a man in his 50s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, in a manner that put her instantly at ease. The tests we're conducting today have been refined over 70 years of the Oracle program, he explained, as he attached sensors to Hannah's scalp. We're mapping neural pathways, visual processing centers, and cognitive response patterns using non-invasive techniques. The initial tests were straightforward visual acuity assessments, depth perception evaluations, response time measurements. But as the day progressed, the examinations became increasingly sophisticated, using advanced imaging technology to monitor Hannah's brain activity as she processed complex visual information. Remarkable, Kendrick murmured, studying the real-time scans of Hannah's neural activity. Your visual cortex shows the classic oracle pattern, enhanced connectivity between regions that process spatial relationships in movement prediction. But there's something else. He adjusted the settings, focusing on a particular area of brain activity. You're showing heightened activity in the intuitive prediction centers, similar to what we observed in your grandfather's scans, but even more pronounced. What does that mean? It means you don't just see the world differently, you anticipate changes before they occur. Wind shifts target movement, environmental variations. Kendrick seemed genuinely excited by the findings. In layman's terms, you have a form of predictive vision. You see not just what is, but what will be moments before it happens. The afternoon session shifted to applied testing with Hannah, viewing simulated shooting scenarios, while the equipment monitored her neural responses. After several hours, Kendrick finally removed the monitoring equipment and compiled his notes. I'll need to analyze the complete data set, but preliminary results confirm what Collins reported from the field training. You're showing neural patterns consistent with top-tier Oracle performance, possibly exceeding previous benchmarks. He smiled encouragingly. In other words, your brain is uniquely optimized for the task you've been recruited to perform. After leaving the medical facility, Hannah rejoined Collins for the afternoon training session. He seemed preoccupied, his usual demanding instruction replaced by a distracted manner that suggested his mind was elsewhere. "Something wrong?" Hannah asked as they prepared the shooting position. Collins hesitated, then made a decision. "Come with me. There's something you need to see before we continue." He led her to a secure room deep within the facility, accessible only through a biometric scanner that recognized his handprint. Inside was a collection of vintage sniper equipment, rifles, scopes, and gear, dating back to the early days of the program. Richard's equipment, Collins explained reverently, lifting an old bolt-action rifle from a custom case. The Remington 700 he used for the Baranov shot in '68. By today's standards, primitive technology. But in the hands of an oracle, Hannah accepted the rifle, feeling a connection to her grandfather through the worn wood and metal. He made a 1,700-yard shot with this, changed the course of the Cold War with that single bullet, Collins confirmed. But it's not just the rifle I wanted to show you. He unlocked a cabinet and removed a worn leather case. Inside was a peculiar device, part scope, part mechanical calculator. This is what made the impossible shots possible, the Oracle scope. I've never seen anything like it, because it's one of a kind. Designed specifically for carriers of the Oracle gene, it enhances the natural intuitive abilities while providing crucial environmental data. Collins handled the device with obvious reverence. It interfaces directly with the visual processing centers unique to Oracle's, creating a feedback loop that amplifies predictive capabilities. "Why haven't I trained with this if it's so effective?" Collins's expression darkened. "Because Wilson believes the technology is too valuable to risk in the field again. After your grandfather was killed, the prototype was retired to secure storage." He replaced the scope carefully. "But I've been advocating for its redeployment. For your mission, we'll need every advantage. You're going against Wilson's wishes by showing me this." Wilson is a strategist, not a shooter. He's never peered through a scope at extreme range, never felt the responsibility of a trigger decision that could alter history. Collins locked the cabinet. "I'm going against protocol because I believe your grandfather would have wanted you to understand the full spectrum of resources available, even those officially deemed too sensitive." That evening, Hannah found herself summoned to Wilson's office for what he described as a mission readiness assessment. The Oracle program director sat behind a desk covered with operational files, maps, and intelligence reports. "Dr. Kendrick's preliminary findings are extraordinary," Wilson began without preamble. "Your neural mapping shows the highest Oracle potential we've measured since your grandfather. Combined with Collins's field reports, I believe you're ready to advance to mission-specific training." "Already?" Hannah couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. Collins thinks I need more general preparation before specializing. Captain Collins would keep you in training for a year if permitted, Wilson said dismissively. We don't have that luxury. Ivan Petrov is planning something significant, something that justifies the risk of deploying a relatively inexperienced oracle. Like what? Wilson activated a secure display screen on the wall. Satellite imagery appeared showing a compound nestled in the mountains of northern Afghanistan. This is Petrov's current base of operations, a former Soviet outpost in the Hindu Kush. Intelligence indicates he's gathering materials for a radiological dispersal device, a dirty bomb intended for deployment against Western targets. Hannah studied the imagery, noting the challenging terrain surrounding the compound. That's remote country, difficult access, limited approach vectors. Precisely why conventional options have failed. Special operations teams can't penetrate his security perimeter. Drone strikes risk missing him due to his unpredictable movement patterns. We need the precision and adaptability that only an oracle can provide. At what range? Wilson hesitated before answering. Based on terrain analysis and security considerations, the only viable shooting position would be approximately 4,800 meters from the target. Hannah stared at him in disbelief. That's 3 miles. No one has ever made a confirmed kill beyond 2,700 meters. Not even my grandfather. Which is precisely why Petrov believes himself safe, Wilson countered. He's studied our capabilities, our limitations. He operates beyond what he considers our effective range, confident in his immunity from precision engagement. And you think I can make a shot that exceeds the world record by more than 2,000 meters? I think you're the only person alive with a realistic chance. Wilson leaned forward. Hannah, this isn't just about completing your grandfather's mission. This is about preventing a catastrophic attack. Everything we've learned about your abilities, your genetic profile, your neural mapping, your performance and training suggests you represent a quantum leap in oracle capabilities. Hannah thought of the unredacted files Sarah had shared, the memorial wall Marcus had shown her, the vintage equipment Collins had revealed. Everyone in this facility seemed to be showing her pieces of a puzzle, each with their own agenda, their own version of the truth. I need to know something, Director, she said finally. The 3 oracles who went after Petrov and failed, were they told the full truth about their missions, about their chances? Wilson's expression hardened slightly. They were told what they needed to know to perform their duties. That's not an answer. It's the only answer you get for now. Wilson closed the file before him. Phase 3 training begins tomorrow. Afghanistan-specific environmental conditions, tactical approaches unique to the Hindu Kush, and cultural briefings on the operational area. He stood, indicating the meeting was over. I suggest you get some rest, Miss Morgan. The real work begins now. As Hannah left Wilson's office, she found Collins waiting in the corridor, his expression unreadable. Wilson's accelerating the timeline, he said. It wasn't a question. How did you know? Because I know James Wilson. He sees weapons, not people. Collins fell into step beside her. What did he tell you about the shot? 4,800 meters, in the Hindu Kush. Collins stopped walking. That's beyond theoretical maximum range, even for an oracle. He seems to think I can do it. Of course he does, because he needs to believe it's possible. Collins's voice lowered. Hannah, I've spent 35 years studying the outer limits of long-range shooting. I've analyzed every record, every environmental factor, every technological advancement. A shot at that distance would require not just extraordinary skill, but a perfect convergence of conditions that might occur once in a lifetime, if at all. Then why pursue this? Why train me if the mission is impossible? Because impossible is relative when it comes to oracles. Collins resumed walking. Your grandfather made shots that ballistic science said couldn't be done. And because, he hesitated, then continued more quietly. Because we're out of options. Petrov has neutralized every conventional approach. If he succeeds in deploying a radiological weapon in a Western city, the death toll could reach thousands. They stopped outside Hannah's quarters. Collins seemed to be wrestling with a decision. There's something Wilson isn't telling you, he said finally. Something about the oracle scope I showed you today. What? It's been modified. Enhanced with modern technology that, might I stress, might extend its effective range beyond anything previously achieved. Collins glanced down the corridor to ensure they weren't overheard. I wasn't supposed to know about the modifications, but I have sources in the technical division. They've integrated quantum computing elements that interface directly with neural patterns unique to Oracle gene carriers. Making the impossible possible, Hannah murmured. Making the nearly impossible slightly less impossible, Collins corrected. It's still the longest, most challenging shot ever attempted. But with your abilities, the enhanced scope, and he paused. And what? And the one factor Wilson is counting on most, your connection to Richard Morgan. The mission that killed your grandfather is the same mission you're being asked to complete. Wilson believes that symmetry matters, that you're literally born for this moment. Colin's expression was solemn. The question is, what do you believe I? Hannah thought of everything she'd learned since discovering her grandfather's footlocker on the ranch in Montana, the classified history, the genetic legacy, the unfinished business that had shaped her family's destiny without their knowledge. I believe in finishing what he started, she said finally. I believe in using these abilities for something that matters. And I believe you'll prepare me as well as humanly possible for whatever lies ahead. Colin studied her face, searching for doubt or hesitation, finding none. Then we start again at dawn, he said, and this time we push beyond what anyone thinks is possible. As Hannah entered her quarters, she found her grandfather's compass on her desk, the inscription catching the light. True aim comes from the heart, not just the eye. Tomorrow she would begin preparing for a shot that defied every limit of human capability and modern technology. A shot that might prevent a terrorist attack, complete her grandfather's mission, and write a new chapter in the hidden history of Project Oracle. But tonight, alone with her thoughts, Hannah Morgan confronted the possibility that she was being prepared not just for a mission, but for a sacrifice following in the footsteps of a man who had given his life in pursuit of an impossible shot. Dawn broke over the mountains of Afghanistan, painting the rugged landscape in gold and shadow. Hannah Morgan lay perfectly still on a rocky outcrop, her body pressed against the cold stone as she peered through her rifle scope at the compound nearly 3 miles away. She had been in this position for 18 hours, her muscles cramping from immobility, her mind focused with an intensity that excluded all distractions. Beside her, Marcus Reed monitored environmental conditions through specialized equipment, his voice a low murmur in her earpiece as he reported subtle changes in wind and atmospheric pressure. The third member of their team, Sarah Jenkins, maintained surveillance of the surrounding terrain from a concealed position 50 meters back, ensuring their hide remained uncompromised. Target area still inactive, Marcus reported, his voice calm and professional, despite the tension that had built over their long vigil. Barometric pressure holding steady at 22.7 inches. Wind at our position southeast at 12 knots, mid-valley, showing lateral movement west to east at approximately 18 knots. Target area experiencing variable gusts between 8 and 15 knots. Hannah acknowledged with the slightest movement of her finger a communication system they had developed during weeks of intensive training. Every word, every breath, every heartbeat mattered when operating at the extreme edge of human capability. The deployment to Afghanistan had come faster than any of them had anticipated. 3 weeks into specialized training for high-altitude, long-distance shooting, Wilson had received intelligence that Petrov was planning to meet with his terrorist network leadership at his mountain compound. The meeting would last less than 6 hours, a brief window of opportunity that might not come again for months. Collins had argued vehemently against the accelerated timeline, insisting Hannah needed more preparation for what would be the most challenging shot in military history. But Wilson had been adamant. The mission would proceed with the personnel and resources available. The potential intelligence value of eliminating Petrov and his leadership cadre simultaneously was too significant to ignore. Now, as the first hint of movement appeared at the compound entrance, Hannah felt the weight of that decision. Through her scope, the modified Oracle scope that Collins had fought to have deployed, she could see guards taking positions, vehicles being inspected. Preparations clearly underway for the arrival of someone important. Movement at the main gate, she reported softly. Security protocols initiating. Consistent with previous intelligence, Sarah confirmed through the comm system. Petrov typically arrives within 30 minutes of security enhancement. Hannah used these precious moments to once again review the mental calculations she had been refining since their arrival at this desolate outpost. The shot she was preparing to take violated every conventional understanding of ballistics. At 4,800 meters, nearly 3 miles, the bullet would spend almost 7 seconds in flight, passing through multiple wind zones, temperature gradients, and atmospheric conditions before reaching its target. Even with her oracle abilities, the enhanced scope and the most advanced ammunition ever developed, success would require a perfect convergence of factors that bordered on the miraculous. Collins had called it threading a needle while riding a roller coaster blindfolded. Collins. The thought of her instructor brought a fresh pang of concern. He should have been here serving as her primary spotter for this historic attempt. But 4 days before deployment, Collins had been hospitalized with what Wilson described as a cardiac event. Hannah suspected the timing was too convenient, that Collins's vocal opposition to the mission timeline had resulted in his forcible sidelining. Marcus was an excellent spotter, experienced and technically proficient, but he lacked the intuitive connection Hannah had developed with Collins during their intense training period. More importantly, he lacked Collins's first-hand knowledge of what had gone wrong during her grandfather's final mission. Vehicle approaching from the South Road, Sarah reported suddenly, matching profile of Petrov's usual transport. 3-vehicle convoy lead and follow vehicles heavily armed. Hannah felt her pulse quicken, but maintained her breathing rhythm with practiced discipline. This was the moment they had traveled halfway around the world to reach the culmination of a journey that had begun when she found her grandfather's compass in that dusty footlocker in Montana. The convoy stopped at the compound gate. Security personnel swarmed around the central vehicle, a heavily armored SUV with tinted windows. Through her scope, Hannah watched as the rear door opened and a figure emerged. Possible visual on primary target, she reported, her voice betraying none of the adrenaline now coursing through her system. Requesting confirmation. Marcus adjusted his spotting scope, focusing on the distant figure now being escorted toward the main building. Height and build consistent with Petrov. Facial recognition difficult at this distance, even with enhanced optics. I need confirmation, Hannah insisted, maintaining her sight picture as the figure moved through the compound courtyard. Sarah's voice came through the calm tension evident despite her professional tone. Satellite confirms convoy originated at Petrov's known location. Probability of positive identification 87% based on movement analysis and pattern recognition. Wilson says that's sufficient for engagement authorization. Hannah felt a flicker of doubt. In all their training scenarios and all the operational briefings, positive visual confirmation had been the unwavering standard. Now suddenly, probability and circumstantial evidence were deemed sufficient for what would be the most challenging shot ever attempted. Stand by, she said, continuing to track the figure as he moved through the courtyard surrounded by security personnel. Something didn't feel right. The way the man moved, the deference shown by his security detail, it matched the intelligence profile, but a nagging intuition told Hannah this situation warranted caution. Hannah, Wilson's voice cut in unexpectedly on the command channel. Intelligence confirms this is our window. You are authorized to engage when ready. Sir, I don't have definitive visual confirmation, Hannah replied, maintaining her professional composure despite her growing concern. The intelligence is solid, Specialist Morgan. We don't get another chance at this. Take the shot. Hannah felt the pressure of the moment, the culmination of months of training, the weight of her grandfather's legacy, the strategic importance of eliminating a terrorist mastermind. But competing with that pressure was the discipline Collins had instilled in her. Never take a shot unless you are absolutely certain of your target. Sir, request permission to maintain surveillance until target enters the main building. Intelligence indicated the meeting would take place in the northeast corner room. That position would provide a clearer visual identification. A tense silence followed, broken only by the soft electronic hum of their communication equipment. Finally, Wilson responded, his voice tight with barely contained frustration. Permission granted, but be advised this delay reduces our extraction window. Hannah continued tracking the figure as he moved across the courtyard toward the main building. The man paused briefly to speak with another security officer, turning slightly to gesture toward the eastern perimeter. In that moment, Hannah saw his face clearly for the first time, the distinctive scar along the jawline, the calculating eyes that had haunted intelligence briefings. But something was wrong. The facial structure, the way he carried himself, subtle discrepancies that might mean nothing to a conventional observer, but registered immediately to her oracle-enhanced perception. Sir, she said carefully, I believe we may be looking at a decoy. Impossible, Wilson snapped. Our intelligence is definitive. With respect, Sir facial structure shows minor inconsistencies with Petrov's biometric profile. Height appears to be approximately 2 centimeters less than documented. Gait pattern doesn't match movement analysis from previous surveillance. Before Wilson could respond, Sarah broke in urgently. Movement on the eastern ridge. Two vehicles approaching via the secondary road. Not on our intelligence timeline. Hannah shifted her attention briefly using the scope's peripheral vision enhancement to monitor the new development while maintaining her primary sight picture on the compound courtyard. The two vehicles, nondescript jeeps better suited to the rough terrain than the armored convoy, stopped well short of the main gate. A small group disembarked, proceeding on foot with the careful movement of men accustomed to hostile environments. One figure stood out, immediately taller than the others, moving with the confident authority of a predator in familiar territory. Even at this distance, Hannah could sense the dangerous competence that radiated from his bearing. Second group approaching main gate, she reported. New arrival matches Petrov's profile more closely than courtyard subject. Confirmation coming through satellite, Sarah reported after a tense moment. Facial recognition 98. 2% match for Ivan Petrov on eastern approach. Multiple high-value targets, Marcus observed quietly. This just got complicated. Hannah's mind raced through the implications. The intelligence had been partially correct. Petrov was indeed coming to this location for a meeting, but the security protocols were more sophisticated than anticipated, involving the decoys and alternative arrival patterns designed to confuse exactly the kind of surveillance they were conducting. Wilson, Hannah said, abandoning protocol in the urgency of the moment. We have a new tactical situation. Request updated engagement parameters. The director's response was immediate and cold. Primary target remains Ivan Petrov. Engagement authorized as soon as positive identification is confirmed. Hannah tracked the new arrival as he approached the compound gate. Unlike the decoy, who had been surrounded by obvious security, this man moved with minimal protection, relying on subtlety rather than a show of force. Classic tradecraft for someone who had spent decades evading the world's most sophisticated intelligence agencies. As he passed through the gate, Hannah caught her first clear view of his face, the same face she had studied in countless intelligence photos, the son of the man her grandfather had failed to eliminate 35 years earlier. Ivan Petrov. No doubt remained. Primary target positively identified, she reported, moving into the compound from eastern entrance. Wind shifting, Marcus warned. Valley currents intensifying. Vertical drafts forming along the eastern ridge. This is getting worse, not better. Hannah acknowledged the deteriorating conditions but maintained her focus on Petrov as he crossed the courtyard. The two figures, decoy and actual target, were now converging near the entrance to the main building. If Petrov entered the structure, the shot window would close until he re-emerged. Range to target, 4783 meters. Marcus updated. Wind now variable from multiple directions. Temperature differential between our position and target area, approximately 15 degrees Celsius. Humidity rising with approaching weather front. In conventional sniping terms, these conditions made the shot virtually impossible. Even with her oracle abilities and the enhanced scope, Hannah knew they were facing a perfect storm of adverse factors. Yet as she watched Petrov through her scope, something unexpected happened. The world around her seemed to slow, peripheral distractions fading as her consciousness narrowed to the perfect alignment of eye scope and target. The environmental variations, wind temperature, humidity, resolved into a complex but comprehensible pattern in her mind. This was what Collins had described during their training, what her grandfather had written about in his journal, the moment of convergence when an oracle's unique neural pathways processed environmental information at a level transcending conscious calculation. I have the shot, Hannah whispered more to herself than to her team. Conditions are deteriorating, Marcus cautioned. Hannah, even with the oracle scope, this exceeds theoretical limits. But Hannah was no longer operating in the realm of theory. She had entered a state of perception where intuition and analysis merged into something beyond either the unique gift that made the oracle program possible. Taking the shot, she announced calmly. Her finger took up the trigger slack with microscopic precision. Her breathing slowed to virtual stillness. Her heartbeat, carefully regulated through techniques Collins had taught her, maintained a steady rhythm that wouldn't disrupt her aim. In the final millisecond before the shot broke, Hannah felt rather than saw a subtle movement at the edge of her scope's view, a figure on a distant rooftop within the compound, raising what appeared to be a spotting scope of his own. The rifle fired its report echoing across the valley as the 338 Lapua round began its incredible journey. Nearly 7 seconds of flight time stretched before her, like an eternity, the bullet passing through multiple wind zones, gravity pulling it in, a trajectory that would rise hundreds of feet above her line of sight before dropping toward the target. Through her scope, Hannah watched as Petrov suddenly stiffened his hand, reaching toward his security team, as if sensing danger. He began to turn, moving with the instinctive reaction of a man who had survived decades of attempts on his life. But the bullet, traveling at supersonic speed, despite the distance it had covered, arrived before he could complete his evasive movement. Hannah saw the impact's center mass exactly where she had aimed, despite the nearly impossible variables at play. Petrov collapsed as his security team reacted in confused panic. The courtyard erupted into chaotic movement as personnel scattered for cover, weapons drawn against an attack whose source remained invisible at such extreme distance. "Target down," Marcus confirmed, his voice tight with disbelief. "Direct hit. Hannah, you just made a shot that rewrites every manual on military marksmanship." But Hannah was already shifting her focus to the figure she had glimpsed on the rooftop, the observer who had appeared in the final moment before her shot. Through her scope, she could now see him more clearly. An older man, military bearing despite civilian clothes, raising not a spotting scope as she had first thought, but a compact pair of binoculars. Even at this extreme distance, something about his posture seemed hauntingly familiar. "We have movement throughout the compound," Sarah reported urgently. "Security forces deploying search patterns. They'll try to triangulate our position based on the shot trajectory." "Initiating extraction protocol," Marcus said, already beginning to pack their essential equipment. "Hannah, we need to move. Now." Hannah maintained her position for a few seconds longer, still focused on the mysterious observer on the rooftop. The man lowered his binoculars and looked directly toward their position, an impossibility given the extreme distance and their carefully concealed hide. Yet Hannah felt with absolute certainty that he was looking straight at her, knew exactly where she was. Then, in a gesture that sent a chill through her body, the man raised his hand in what appeared to be a deliberate salute before turning and disappearing from view. "Hannah," Marcus's voice cut through her fixation, "we need to move immediately. Security forces are already deploying along the likely approach vectors." Hannah forced herself to break away from the scope, helping Marcus rapidly break down their specialized equipment. The mission had been a success, the primary objective accomplished against impossible odds. Now came the equally challenging task of extracting safely from hostile territory. They moved with practiced efficiency, erasing all evidence of their presence before beginning their descent down the treacherous backside of the ridge. Their extraction plan called for an 18-kilometer movement through mountainous terrain to reach a rendezvous point where a helicopter would extract them under cover of darkness. "Command Overwatch team beginning extraction," Sarah reported as they began their careful movement through the rocky landscape. "Target neutralized, requesting confirmation of extraction timeline." "Extraction timeline unchanged," came the response from the operational center. "Helicopter will be on station at 0200 hours. Maintain radio silence unless emergency protocols are required." They moved in single file through the unforgiving terrain, Sarah on point, Hannah in the middle with the irreplaceable Oracle scope secured in her pack, Marcus bringing up the rear and periodically checking for signs of pursuit. Years of Montana backcountry experience served Hannah well as she navigated the steep slopes and loose scree that could send an inexperienced climber tumbling to their death. 2 hours into their extraction, as they traversed a narrow ravine that offered concealment from aerial observation, Sarah suddenly raised her fist, the universal signal to halt and take cover. The team froze in place, weapons ready as they scanned for the threat Sarah had detected. "Movement ahead," she whispered through their tactical communication system. "Multiple personnel establishing blocking positions along our planned route." "How many?" Marcus asked, already assessing alternative paths on his tactical map. "At least 8, possibly more. Pattern suggests professional military, not local militia." Hannah felt a growing sense of unease. The speed with which these forces had deployed suggested they knew not just the general direction of the shot, but the specific extraction route the team had planned to use. "This was anticipated," she said quietly. "They knew we would be here." Marcus's expression darkened. Impossible. This route wasn't even in the primary briefing package. It was Collins's contingency plan added to the operational order less than 24 hours before deployment. The implication hung in the air between them. If the opposition had knowledge of their secondary extraction route, it meant the mission had been compromised at the highest level. Someone with access to their final operational planning had provided information to Petrov's organization. Alternative route, Sarah asked, already marking options on her tactical display. Marcus studied the terrain map, his expression grim. Only viable option is to move further east, then circle back toward the extraction point through this canyon system. Adds at least 4 hours to our timeline. Cutting it close for the extraction window, Hannah observed. Too close, Sarah agreed. We need to alert command of the change in timeline. Marcus weighed the options, clearly reluctant to break radio silence, but recognizing the necessity. Minimum transmission, position compromise, only new estimated arrival time at extraction point. Sarah prepared the encrypted burst transmission, keeping the message as brief as possible to minimize detection probability. As she activated the communication system, Hannah noticed something that sent a fresh surge of adrenaline through her body. Hold transmission, she said sharply. Check your tactical frequency. Sarah frowned but complied, examining the communications equipment. Her expression shifted to alarm. We're being scanned, active electronic surveillance on our frequency range. They're waiting for us to transmit, Marcus realized. They know our communications protocols, our frequencies, everything. The team exchanged grim looks as the full implications became clear. This wasn't just a compromise mission. It was a carefully prepared trap designed to eliminate them after the primary objective was completed. We go dark, Marcus decided. No communications until we reach the extraction point. Alternative route east through the canyon system. We'll need to move fast to make the timeline. They altered their course, moving deeper into the canyon network that carved through the ancient mountains. The terrain became increasingly difficult. Narrow passages where they had to proceed in single file, steep climbs requiring technical skill, sections where they waded through ice-cold mountain streams to mask their trail. As darkness fell, they continued their relentless pace, navigating by night vision equipment and Marcus's expert knowledge of mountain warfare. The extraction point was still more than 12 kilometers away, and their timeline was growing dangerously tight. We need to rest, Sarah said finally as they reached a sheltered outcropping that offered some protection from the bitter mountain wind. 15 minutes to rehydrate and check equipment. As they took their brief respite, Hannah found herself thinking about the mysterious observer she had seen on the compound rooftop, the man who had seemingly saluted her after the shot. Something about him nagged at her consciousness, a connection she couldn't quite place. Marcus, she said quietly, when you were working with my grandfather, was there anyone else on his team besides Collins? Someone who might have survived the East Germany operation? Marcus looked up sharply. No, according to the after-action report, it was just Richard Morgan and Frank Collins. Why do you ask? Hannah described the figure she had observed, the strange salute that seemed directed specifically at her. It felt like recognition, like he knew exactly who had taken the shot. Could be Petrov's security chief, Sarah suggested. Ex-KGB reportedly worked with Anatoly Petrov back in the Cold War days. Maybe, Hannah conceded, though the explanation didn't satisfy her intuition. There had been something almost familiar about the man, as if she had seen his face before, perhaps in her grandfather's files or the memorial wall at the nest. The question remained unresolved as they resumed their movement, pushing through exhaustion in the growing cold of the Afghan night. The mountains loomed around them like ancient sentinels, indifferent to the human drama playing out among their timeless peaks. As they approached the final stretch before the extraction point, Marcus held up his hand, signaling another halt. Ahead, the canyon they had been following opened into a broader valley, the designated landing zone for their helicopter extraction. But something had caught Marcus's attention, some detail out of place in the natural landscape. Movement at the extraction point, he reported, after carefully scanning the area with his night vision equipment. Multiple personnel in concealed positions surrounding the LZ. Another ambush, Sarah concluded grimly. They're anticipating our arrival from all possible directions. Hannah felt a cold certainty settle in her stomach. Their mission had been compromised, not just partially but completely. Routes, timeline, communications, extraction plan. Every aspect had been shared with the enemy, creating a perfect trap from which escape seemed increasingly unlikely. Options, she asked, maintaining the professional calm that Collins had drilled into her during their intensive training. Marcus studied the tactical situation with the experienced eye of a veteran special operator. We can't approach the primary extraction point. Too heavily covered, too many angles of fire. We need an alternative LZ. The nearest viable landing zone is 8 kilometers northwest, Sarah said, consulting her map. But we have no way to communicate the change to the extraction team without revealing our position. Hannah thought of the technical briefings she had received before deployment, the contingency plans that had been developed for worst-case scenarios. The Oracle scope, she said suddenly. It has an integrated emergency beacon with a dedicated frequency separate from our tactical communications. Too risky, Marcus objected. If they're monitoring all electronic emissions, it's designed to be undetectable, Hannah countered. Quantum encryption burst transmission lasting less than half a second, developed specifically for compromised extraction scenarios. Sarah and Marcus exchanged glances, weighing the risks against their increasingly limited options. Finally, Marcus nodded. Do it, but we keep moving while the transmission activates. Northwest route toward the secondary LZ. Hannah carefully removed the Oracle scope from its protective case, activating the emergency system with a precisely sequenced set of commands. The device hummed almost imperceptibly as it established its secure connection, then fell silent after the transmission completed. Now we find out if anyone's listening, she said, repacking the precious equipment. They altered their course once again, moving northwest through increasingly difficult terrain as the extraction window grew perilously close. Their bodies strained against the limits of human endurance, pushed beyond exhaustion by the knowledge that stopping meant death. An hour later, as they approached the secondary landing zone, Sarah suddenly raised her hand in warning. They froze, listening intently to the night sounds around them. They're barely audible, but growing steadily stronger, the distinctive whoomp, whoomp, whoomp of helicopter rotors approaching at low altitude. The sound came not from the direction of their primary extraction point, but directly toward their current position. Someone got the message, Marcus said with palpable relief. But stay alert. This could still be a response to our transmission, not necessarily our people. They moved into the small clearing that offered just enough space for a helicopter to touch down, maintaining defensive positions as they scanned the night sky for visual confirmation. Minutes later, a Black Hawk helicopter appeared running without lights, descending toward their position with the precision of expert pilots operating in hostile territory. As the helicopter settled into a hover just above the ground, its crew chief appeared in the open door, scanning the terrain with night vision goggles. Hannah felt a surge of recognition, not for the crew chief, whom she had never met, but for the figure seated just behind him in the helicopter's cabin. Frank Collins, the training officer she had believed sidelined by a convenient medical emergency, sat strapped into the Black Hawk, his weathered face set in grim determination as he supervised their extraction. He spotted Hannah, immediately gesturing urgently for the team to board, while the helicopter maintained its precarious hover. They sprinted from cover, keeping low beneath the powerful rotor wash as they climbed aboard the aircraft. The moment the last team member was secured, the pilot pulled collective, the Black Hawk leaping skyward with stomach-lurching acceleration before banking hard to the east away from the mountains and the trap that had awaited them. "Collins," Hannah said as she strapped in beside her instructor. "How did you—" "Not now," he interrupted, handing her a secure headset. "We're still in hostile airspace. Full debrief when we reach the FOB." The flight back to the forward operating base passed in tense silence, the helicopter hugging the terrain to avoid radar detection, while electronic countermeasures created a protective bubble against heat-seeking missiles. Hannah found herself watching Collins, noting the tension in his jaw, the way his eyes continuously scanned outside the aircraft as if expecting attack at any moment. This wasn't the face of a man celebrating a successful mission. This was a man who knew something had gone catastrophically wrong, something beyond the compromised extraction plan. 2 hours later, they touched down at the remote airbase that had served as their forward staging area. As the rotors wound down, Collins gestured for Hannah to follow him, leading her not to the standard debriefing area, but to a secure communications room isolated from the main facility. Inside, he activated a series of electronic countermeasures before finally turning to face her. The mission was compromised from the beginning, he said without preamble. Wilson knew it and sent you anyway. Hannah felt a cold certainty settle in her stomach. How? Because I found the leak while you were in country. That's why I wasn't on the mission, not because of any cardiac event, but because Wilson removed me when I started asking questions about operational security. Colin's expression was hard with contained fury. The intelligence about Petrov's meeting wasn't just convenient, it was engineered, fed to us through channels designed to bypass normal verification. Why would Wilson send us into a trap? Because the mission was never just about eliminating Petrov. Collins activated a secure terminal, bringing up classified files that Hannah had never seen before. Project Oracle has been under congressional scrutiny for years. Budget overruns, questionable operational outcomes, ethical concerns about genetic screening. Wilson needed a spectacular success to ensure continued funding. So he used me as bait, Hannah said, the pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. He knew Petrov would be looking for another Oracle attempt. He knew Petrov would be prepared, yes. But I don't think he anticipated the level of intelligence Petrov had acquired about your mission specifics. Collins pulled up another file, a security analysis showing infiltration patterns in classified communications. Someone inside the program provided Petrov with your operational plan, extraction routes, communication protocols, everything. Hannah thought of the mysterious observer on the rooftop, the man who had saluted her after the impossible shot. There was someone watching at the compound, someone who seemed to know exactly where I was. Collins stiffened. Describe him. When Hannah finished her description, Collins sat heavily in the nearest chair, his face ashen. That's impossible. You recognize him. If your description is accurate, that was James Wilson. Hannah stared at him in disbelief. Wilson? But he was at the command center. He was on our communications throughout the mission. Was he? Collins challenged. Did you actually see him during the mission briefing? Or just hear his voice over the comm system? Hannah tried to recall the chaotic hours before deployment, the rushed final briefing. Wilson had been present initially, but had left before the final operational details were reviewed, citing a secure call he needed to take. The voice on the comm, she said slowly. It could have been recorded, or someone impersonating him. Exactly. Collins pulled up another file, a travel record showing James Wilson had departed the operations center on a classified flight 12 hours before Hannah's mission began. Destination redacted. I found this in the secure server after piecing together inconsistencies in the mission planning. If Wilson is the leak, Hannah couldn't complete the thought, the implications too staggering to process. The director of Project Oracle, the man who had recruited her, who had shared her grandfather's history, who had positioned himself as the guardian of her family's legacy, a traitor working with the very terrorist they had been sent to eliminate. It goes deeper than just this mission, Collins continued, his voice dropping lower. I've been tracing unusual patterns in Oracle operations for years. Missions that went wrong in very specific ways. Operatives who died in situations that, in retrospect, appear engineered rather than coincidental. Why would he work with Petrov? I don't think he works for Petrov. I think he and Petrov work for someone else, someone who has been using both the Oracle program and Petrov's terrorist network as pieces in a much larger game. Hannah thought of the unredacted files Sarah had shared, the hidden history of the Oracle program during the Cold War. The Russians, Collins shook his head, not current Russian intelligence. This feels like something older, something that dates back to your grandfather's era. A faction that survived the collapse of the Soviet system and continued operating independently. Like a Cold War that never ended, Hannah murmured. Exactly. And your grandfather was a key player in that shadow war, whether he realized it or not. Hannah remembered her shot, the moment when everything had aligned perfectly, allowing her to accomplish what ballistic science insisted was impossible. The clarity she had felt, the absolute certainty that transcended conscious calculation. The shot, she said suddenly, the impossible shot. Petrov was ready for it. He was moving the instant before impact, as if he sensed it coming. She looked up at Collins. They wanted to see if I could actually make it, if the Oracle gene really could do what the program claimed. Collins nodded slowly. A test, not just of you, but of the entire concept behind Project Oracle. The genetic modifications, the neural enhancements, the specialized equipment, all of it validated by that single shot. And now they know it works, which means you've become the most valuable asset in this shadow war and the most significant threat. Collins checked his watch. We don't have much time. The official debrief team will be here within the hour and I won't be allowed to participate. What do? We disappear. Collins handed her a small data drive. Everything I've discovered about Wilson, about the compromised aspects of the program, is on this. Names, dates, operational details that establish the pattern. Take it to Marcus and Sarah, they're clean. I've verified that much. Trust no one else until you have confirmed their loyalty independently. Hannah took the drive, securing it in an inner pocket. What about you? I'm going to create a diversion. Make them think we're following one path while you take another. He gripped her shoulder firmly. Your grandfather believed in what the Oracle program was supposed to be, a precision instrument for justice, not a weapon for hidden agendas. He would be proud of what you did today, even under these circumstances. The compass, Hannah said, suddenly reaching into her pocket. I should give it back to you. For luck. Collins smiled, a rare, genuine expression that transformed his weathered features. Keep it. You've earned it. He checked the corridor, ensuring it remained clear. One more thing. There's a cabin in western Montana near the Idaho border. Richard and I used it as a safe house during the Cold War. The coordinates are on the drive. If we get separated, that's where I'll go. Montana, Hannah said with a hint of wonder. Full circle. Your grandfather always said patterns matter in our line of work. Nothing is truly coincidental. Collins opened the door, his expression shifting back to professional detachment. Now go. Find Marcus and Sarah. Get to the transport plane before the debrief team arrives. As Hannah slipped through the door, Collins called after her softly. Hannah, the shot you made today 3 miles against impossible conditions, it changes everything we thought we knew about the Oracle program's potential. Whatever happens next, remember that you've accomplished something no one in history has ever done. Hannah nodded, feeling the weight of that achievement alongside the growing understanding of its implications. The shot had been historic, unprecedented, and had revealed her existence to forces that had been operating in the shadows for decades. She moved through the base with careful purpose, locating Marcus and Sarah in the equipment storage area where they were inventorying their gear. A few whispered words, a glimpse of Collins's data drive, and they immediately understood the urgency of the situation. 30 minutes later, they were aboard a transport plane bound for a classified location. Having bypassed the standard post-mission procedures with the help of Collins's diversion, a fabricated security alert that had drawn attention to the opposite side of the base. As the aircraft lifted off, Hannah looked down at the rugged Afghan landscape falling away beneath them. Somewhere in those mountains, the body of Ivan Petrov lay cooling, a mission objective achieved against impossible odds. But the true battle, she now realized, was just beginning. She clutched her grandfather's compass, feeling its solid weight in her palm as the plane banked toward the west. The inscription caught the dim light of the aircraft cabin. True aim comes from the heart, not just the eye. Her grandfather had understood something profound about the Oracle gift, that it wasn't merely a genetic anomaly enhancing visual processing and spatial awareness. It was something deeper, something that connected perception with intuition in ways science was only beginning to understand. And now that gift had made her both a legend and a target in a clandestine war that had been raging since before she was born. A war in which her grandfather had been a pivotal figure and in which she had now assumed his mantle. As the plane carried them away from Afghanistan and toward an uncertain future, Hannah Morgan had made a silent vow to the memory of Richard Morgan. She would complete what he had started, not just by eliminating Anatoly Petrov's son, but by exposing the corruption that had infiltrated the program he had served so faithfully. The legacy shot had been just the beginning. The true mission lay ahead. 3 months after the mission in Afghanistan, Hannah Morgan stood on the familiar hilltop overlooking her family's ranch in Montana. The golden afternoon sunlight bathed the vast property in warm amber hues, highlighting the freshly painted barn and new fencing that stretched across the pastures. Below, she could see her father and brother working with the small herd of cattle they'd recently purchased, the first step in rebuilding the ranch that had nearly slipped from their grasp. Hannah clutched her grandfather's compass, its brass casing warm from the sun and her touch. The inscription caught the light as she turned it over in her palm. True aim comes from the heart, not just the eye. The words had acquired new meaning since that impossible shot in Afghanistan. The transfer of funds from Project Oracle had arrived with remarkable efficiency, after the mission accompanied by commendation papers that would never be displayed publicly. Within weeks, the bank had lifted the foreclosure threat, and the Morgans had begun the slow process of restoring their family legacy. But Hannah knew that the financial security came with an invisible price tag. Since returning home, she'd maintained vigilant security protocols that Collins had taught her. The data drive he'd given her remained hidden in a secure location, its contents a digital smoking gun that could expose decades of corruption and betrayal. Sarah and Marcus remained off-grid monitoring intelligence channels for signs of Wilson's activities while gathering evidence against him. Collins had made it to the safe house near the Idaho border. His encrypted messages arrived weekly, each containing another piece of the puzzle. They were assembling the true history of Project Oracle and the shadowy forces that had corrupted it from within. "There you are," her mother's voice called from behind her. Margaret Morgan climbed the gentle slope carrying 2 steaming mugs. "Thought you might want some coffee." Hannah accepted the mug gratefully. "Thanks, Mom." Margaret studied her daughter's face, noting the subtle changes that months of training in combat had etched there. The girl who had left Montana to save the family ranch had returned a woman with shadows in her eyes and secrets she couldn't share. "You know," Margaret said carefully, "your father and I are grateful for what you did for us, for the ranch. But we worry about the case to you." Hannah sipped her coffee, buying time to form a response that wouldn't be a complete lie. "I'm fine, Mom, really. Just adjusting." To civilian life, Margaret's knowing smile held a hint of sadness. "Or to knowing you'll be leaving again." Hannah glanced sharply at her mother. Margaret Morgan had always possessed an uncanny intuition, a quality Hannah now suspected might share genetic roots with her own oracle abilities. "The people I worked with," Hannah said carefully, "there are some unfinished matters, things that need to be resolved." Margaret nodded slowly. "Your grandfather was the same way. Always felt the weight of responsibility, even when he tried to hide it." She placed a gentle hand on Hannah's arm. "Whatever you're involved in, whatever you've done, we're proud of you. Just remember your promise." "Always come home," Hannah replied softly, recalling the words her father had extracted from her before she first left. "Always come home," Margaret confirmed. "Now come down for dinner. Rebecca's coming over and she's dying to hear about your military experiences, the ones you can share anyway." As her mother descended the hill, Hannah turned once more to survey the vast Montana landscape stretching to the horizon. Somewhere out there, Wilson and his allies were regrouping, perhaps already planning their next move. They had lost Petrov, but gained confirmation of what the Oracle gene could accomplish. Hannah had no doubt they would come for her eventually. Her hand tightened around the compass. She had completed her grandfather's mission, eliminating the son of the man he had failed to stop. But Richard Morgan's true legacy wasn't in the shots he'd taken or the targets he'd eliminated. It was in his determination to use his extraordinary abilities for justice to stand against those who would twist the Oracle program to serve hidden agendas. "I'll finish what you started, Grandpa," she whispered to the wind. "All of it." The secure satellite phone Collins had provided vibrated in her jacket pocket. Hannah checked the message coordinates in a time 3 days hence, the first step in their counteroffensive against Wilson and whoever he worked for. As she turned to head down to the ranch house, Hannah felt a peculiar sense of clarity. The impossible shot she'd made in Afghanistan had been just the opening move in a game that had been playing out since the Cold War. But this time she wouldn't be a pawn manipulated by forces beyond her control. This time she was playing to win. The legacy shot had been just the beginning. The true mission, her mission lay ahead, and Hannah Morgan was ready.